Warning, this review will contain spoilers, and if you haven't seen the episode in the last 4 days and decide to go past this point, it's your own fault, so don't get mad at me. 6 characters of fire and visualizations of legends and mythos aplenty. Will that be a good episode? Only I can be the judge of that. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pones N Stuff. I mentioned in last week's review of Triple Threat that this episode would need to be a creative spark to show that this series had not run out of interesting ideas, and by latching onto a well-endowed animated episode plot trope, they had a shot at doing it, even if there was a risk of it going wrong. Futurama's Tales of Interest and The Simpsons' long-running Treehouse of Horror specials are great examples of this anthology tale trope, and MLP knew they had to hit the ground running or they wouldn't have the ability to do it properly again. The thing is though, knowing that The Simpsons took a lot of abstract chances with how they mixed pop culture with their own lore, means that if there's one thing MLP could get right, is that they could establish these stories as part of equestrian folklore and have it seem like they actually happened. By placing each story into a time period befitting of differences in visual and audio capabilities, it allowed each one to not only be fresh, but allow for a variety in tones of writing to come through, alongside a very noticeable departure from the dank cave that our protagonists had found themselves into, which did provide very nice contrast indeed. And these stories of personal growth, sacrifice and bravery could have been very lackluster, but they delivered great morals that supplemented a distinct lack of an overall one, which meant that many lessons could be taken from them, with the CMCs utilising and experiences providing perspective's message out of its very final bits of dialogue to show their personal growth through their second camping trip was very well worth seeing, and that was of course in itself substantiated by great continuity following on from Season 3's Sleepless in Ponyville, and thankfully not being a carbon copy of it in the process. And with the continuity in the driving seat, this episode felt like it was paced and structured to perfection and flowed without a hitch, with enough character development in small measures to ensure that the anthology of tales that this episode was felt like it meant something. They weren't just plucked from obscurity, they weren't just pointless stories put in to fill time in an episode that hadn't made an effort, because my god, it looked like it did, and it sounded like that as well, because they looked fantastic, and my god, they were tense at times, to the point where we really felt like we were on an absolute ride. And not just that, the characters replicated the emotions we all felt with aplomb, and I felt them at home as well, so I say that those stories' jobs were done with absolute precision, and they allowed for an episode that felt dramatic and intense, yet giving room to have a good laugh at the protagonist's expense when the time was right. Now if that isn't good tone balancing, I do not know what is. In this episode you could relax, as this show took you on an escapist adventure, making you feel excited and enthralled while still packing the morals that you would expect from episodes past. Speaking of the past, the original mid-80s MLP series, the one that launched this juggernaut of a franchise, made its bread and butter thanks to sending these tiny little adorable slabs of pony meat onto very dangerous and dramatic adventures from week to week. And the thing is, while Gen 4 has done that from time to time, fitting with its own lore and its continuity, logically they had to strip this back for morals and friendship lessons, and in a way sometimes I feel they can lose sight of what made the original so appealing to both genders, let alone one. So to see this happen is quite refreshing, knowing it doesn't happen too much when push comes to shove. However, knowing that they didn't have to use the characters that we've already outlined, Rainbow Dash, Applejack, Rarity, CMCs, and filling it in with new ones means that the creativity that I craved from the last episode has been satisfied, because I don't taint it with their personalities, making it feel very, very fresh. And inevitably, the visuals, the audio, and of course the morals fit in with a well-executed story to make it seem like not much actually went wrong here. However, all of these categories fall under some criticism, meaning I can wreck this something fierce. The biggest fault came from the writing, and while I can praise these 3 stories for offering up something different, they were so linear, grounded, and foreshadowable that honestly, I really could see their endings from a mile away, meaning I was robbed of their surprise. And not just that, the central 6 characters who weren't involved in these tales didn't have enough room to fully showcase themselves, which is quite funny considering they were inside a cave for symbolism's sake. However, I will give credit to what they managed to squeeze out, with Rainbow Dash showing a caring attitude that we rarely see, Scootaloo had her fears amplified, and the continuity of the Season 3 episode was held up beautifully, and as for Apple Bloom, she showed a rarely seen excitable and overactive nature, providing a lot of comedy to cut through the drama with seamless effort. And while Applejack, Rarity and Sweetie Belle were there, they didn't really offer up much, and it was punctuated overall with some quite bland voice acting, although Scootaloo and Apple Bloom managed to deliver something. Apple Bloom's squeals in particular were just adorable, and I laughed my arse off uproariously. Now, while I've praised a lot of the elements of this episode outright, they didn't get away without a blemish or two. The animation, while stunning with good locations, a variety of effects and designs, it had a lot to work with, and a good few transitions too, but all in all it was missing a major overblown set piece to put it over the top and give it full marks from me. The music, while variety filled and fun on the ears, did not shift in instrument, tempo or sound when getting through those tense fight scenes, because obviously you have different time periods, different types of characters of different status, and logically you would want to ensure that each fight scene felt unique, but they did not. And that annoyed me immensely, considering the efforts that the rest of the episode had done to try and substantiate itself. And as for the messages and morals, while I love that they tied all the story elements together and Under Your Nose allowed for something even more intense to come through morally, they did have one small problem in that Rockhoof's moral came as a result of a magical Deus Ex Machina, which wasn't good enough when both of the subsequent stories and the cave escape rounded themselves off conclusively, ruining the impact of what it could have had. And finally, having no explanation of the Flyder's origins and why exactly they were there in the first place was a disappointment, alongside some very dubious use of physics in a cartoon. And that really annoyed me. But the thing is, I look at this episode from a distance and realise that even though there were some small flaws about, in spite of its simplicity, it did rather well for itself. And to put a cherry on top of this cake, I love this. I love that they managed to do this, because in another great twist, all three of the stories highlighted in this episode are extended in the Legends of Equestria comics. Cross-media continuity, people! This is utterly fantastic! When I went into this episode, I wanted it to rebound quickly from Triple Threat's obvious failings, and even though it may seem like not too many steps were taken to ensure it, I am going to say this right now that I am very happy with the results of their efforts here, because I could switch my brain off, critically and casually, just to enjoy a piece of entertaining, action-packed, dramatic, and morally rich television, which is something that this show used to be able to do without much effort, and I'm very happy to know that they've done it properly this time. This was a fun, yet at times in-your-face dramatic episode that stretched its lore out while ensuring that something was learnt. It was an episode of this show that did it with very little fuss, very little problems, and was extremely enjoyable in almost all the categories it offered. And sure, while the writing and voice acting faltered in comparison with the rest, the others didn't come away completely unscathed either, showing that little mistakes can make the difference in where it lies on the good to brilliant scale of things. And while this episode didn't do enough to reach the top echelon of my favourites, it was damn close, all because those in charge decided after the last few to strip things back and offer up a lot, delivering on the promise that the premise held for itself, something that last week's episode failed to do on almost every conceivable level. This is the type of unexpected success that I love this show producing sometimes, because as a reviewer and a passionate watcher of many years, I expect the writers, animators and composers to give me something more than a typical young female demographic Y-rated cartoon. We expect something more, but I love it when those expectations of grandeur are stripped away and they still manage to deliver something great. It's fantastic. And it shows what can happen when very little is needed to make something work. And it may look quite vanilla from the outset, but this little gem is one that I feel hits the right notes, and most importantly of all, makes you remember how fun it can be to watch this show. Something that we all need to be reminded of at times. Overall, Campfire Tales scored a total of 20 out of 25, which is a B+. In closing, I feel that I've particularly enjoyed an episode that some of you may not have that much time for, but then again, it was a nice refresher to what this show is at its core, a piece of escapist animated fun that makes you learn something from time to time, which is not a bad thing, and as a reviewer, I tend to forget this, because I'm ultra critical, and inevitably I expect a lot more, but then to see what this came out with, it was a nice shot in the arm to remind me that this show is pretty harmless but damn fun when you put your mind to it, and that, ladies and gentlemen, isn't a bad thing, it's a good thing. And of course, next week, the changelings are back in the forefront. I don't know whether it's going to end up making the same impact as this one did, but you never know, I have been wrong before, which is only a sign of potential things to come. I have been Freddie Thomas, you've been people watching, this has been another episode of Pones N Stuff for the CC Network, and I will see you all next time.